Hello all again. We're back in our studio in the bowels of the University of Southampton, rather than in the balmy sunshine of Portus. But I'm here to talk to Katherine Crawford, who's a PhD student studying at the University of Southampton. I'm working with Dragoner and Simon, looking at processional routes at Ostia. But as well as that, she knows an awful lot about Portus, and she's been addressing, I know, loads and loads of your comments and queries on the platform over the last few weeks. But what I wanted to do is focus on a few comments and questions that have been coming up quite frequently. But first off, because I'm very nerdy, I'm holding my phone with the questions on, but behind us we've added, through the magic of digital technology, somewhere. And I'm going to ask Katherine where it is. So where are we?
So this is actually one of the mosaics that we've talked about throughout the course. That's in the Square of the Corporations in Ostia. So this was a massive structure that had a whole bunch of different rooms, potentially for specific guilds, related with grain trade, olive oil, wine throughout the Mediterranean. And cool. So it provides us great insight into some of the areas that we're trading with Portus and things coming into the port.
Okay, brilliant. I remember when you introduced yourself at the beginning of the course, you talked about processions being one of your focal point. Would processions have been coming through here or around here, or don't we know?
Possibly. We don't know. There is a temple in the middle of the Square of the Corporations, but unfortunately we don't know which religion it was used for because we don't have a surviving inscription. Oh, potentially the imperial cult, so it's possible that a procession could have gone through it, right, but no concrete evidence one way or another.
Okay. Okay, so now I'll look at some of the questions on the platform. The first one is, why is it that Ostia is so much better preserved, or seems so much better preserved than Portus does?
It has to do with a lot of different factors, and part of this is that it remained pretty well preserved throughout antiquity, from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance. In the 17th, 18th century, we get a lot of antiquarians coming and visiting the site, and they can see a lot of ruins still preserved. We get etchings, so we can see things like the certain bath structures and even parts of the theater pretty well preserved above the ground. But then it also comes down to how it was excavated. In the 18th, early 19th century, we have a lot of various excavations that are more interested in trying to find mosaics, pieces of painting, sculptures, even marble, and those are taken out, and a lot are taken to private collections that are throughout Europe or even in the Vatican. Mm-hmm. And then it isn't really until 1938 to 1942 that we have the largest scale excavations in Ostia that were actually instigated by Mussolini, and this more than doubles the excavation area. So it was years and years of just trying to excavate as much of the site as possible to reveal what ruins were there. But the downside of this is that we have very little documentation of what was found in these excavations, no consideration to small finds, and as a result, a lot of the structures, we don't have clear identifications. Even for me working with temples, probably about half the temples we don't know who they were to because there wasn't surviving evidence. Things weren't found or kept that can help us identify. So while we have such great preservation of the site, it's also kind of a detriment because there's so much material that was lost in this huge scale excavation process. But that's kind of the reason. It just has to do with how it was excavated in comparison to Portus. Okay. That so much remains.
And I suppose also, I mean, a lot of, as I understand it, a lot of the buildings at Ostia have been, partially or fully reconstructed as well. Yes. So there's large portions of the site that you see that have only fairly recently been reconstructed.
Very true.
Whereas at Portus we have some extraordinarily well-preserved buildings that haven't seen any form of reconstruction at all. And we also see the very deliberate destruction of buildings.
Yes, exactly.
As part of the history of the site as discussed by Simon. Okay, that's fascinating. Thank you very much. Okay, so another one that comes up quite a lot. What do we know about the people who lived in Ostia, and can what we know about them tell us perhaps about the people who were at Portus or life at Portus?
Yeah, this is a question I've seen coming up quite a lot as people are interested in the daily life of people that would have been maybe working at Portus, living in Ostia. And we can see clearly, especially in the 2nd century, we start to get these large-scale apartment buildings being constructed throughout the city of Ostia. So this tells us that there is a massive increase in population. People needed a place to live. And with these apartment buildings, in addition to regular large grand-scale houses, we're seeing different classes of people, both luxurious domus or houses and small apartment buildings, and evidence that some of the rooms and apartments even would have been rented out for short periods of time from people coming into Portus. So this gives us an indication that yes, there is an influx of people coming to live in Ostia, which potentially means that they were working in Portus. And then it also gives us great insight into kind of daily activity. We can see within the apartment buildings and the private houses a lot of wall paintings and mosaics that people have been interested in throughout the course. So seeing kind of the decorations. But then we also get things like guilds that show us daily activities that were occurring throughout Ostia, and a lot of these guilds actually had to do with trade, like we see in the Square of the Corporations. So it's piecing together all of these different bits of what we can see in Ostia and seeing how it might apply and help our understanding at Portus.
It is. Yeah, I do love the comparison, because we have that comparison between the massive industrial scale that we we talk a lot about at Portus, and then here at Ostia more of the minutiae of daily life. So you can literally wander around along the street and walk into a bar. Sadly with nothing on sale.
I know,
but you can walk in anyway. You can bring your own. You can bring your own. Okay, so a third one. What was Ostia's role in late antiquity, and did it have close ties to Portus then as well?
This is a difficult question, just like it's difficult to answer for Portus. As far as we can tell, as late antiquity progressed, it had less and less connection to Portus. We know that in the 4th century, in 410, with the sack of Rome, and we have evidence of that at Portus, Ostia appears to have been pretty much ignored. So we can kind of see at that point the ties between the two are starting to diminish quite a bit. That doesn't mean that there wasn't any, but that it wasn't as strong as it used to be. And then at the end of throughout the 4th century, we do see that the population continues to be pretty significant in Ostia. We see building and construction, reconstruction of a lot of structures there throughout that period, but this starts to decline in the 5th and 6th century. And then you get the influx of Christianity, but you still see remodeling of different buildings, so we can tell there's activity, but it's difficult to really understand late antiquity just because it hasn't been until recently that scholars are even interested in that period, and it's kind of a new area of study for applying to Ostia.
But it's fascinating, again, maybe to consider the ways in which the studies that we're making of late antiquity at Portus can inform Ostia and vice versa.
Yes.
Okay. All right, marvellous, thank you. And then, so your last one, did the people visiting Portus have specific gods or temples they worshipped at when they arrived at the port?
They probably did. We know that there was the one temple in Portus, but unfortunately we don't know if there are other temples there. So it would make perfect sense that people that were staying for more than 1 or 2 days and staying in Ostia would be going to temples there. Especially, we have reliefs that show sacrifices as ships are coming into port, so you want to give a sacrifice in thanksgiving for your safe arrival, or even for leaving, that you have a safe travel. So it's very likely that people would have been worshiping at different temples in Ostia, and Ostia had so many different temples, over 40, to almost any deity you could possibly want, from Near Eastern cults like Serapis and Isis to your traditional Capitoline deities. So
you'd expect there to be similar diversity at Portus. Would that necessarily be represented in temples, or are there smaller scale ways of seeing religion that we could find at Portus potentially?
It could be in temples, or it could be if we start to find more private dwellings and private altars, that we get that a lot throughout Ostia, private dedications. That maybe if there were hotels or something that we find in the future, there might have been something there for people to worship at, just not on as grand a scale as a temple.
Marvellous. Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, I've learned loads as usual, and I hope all of you enjoyed that as well. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.